Welcome to Between Sundays. Join Gary Lewis, Mark Williams, Loran Livingston, and David Cooper for candid, transparent conversations about life in ministry. This is more than just sermons and church services. It's the real work of pastoring, the challenges, triumphs, the heart and soul of ministry that happens between Sundays.
I'm excited to welcome you to our very first episode of Between Sundays, authentic conversations about life and ministry. I know you're going to be blessed by the guests that come on, by the conversations that are had. And I want to start by introducing my co-host, Dr. Mark Williams, longtime pastor, executive committee member, former general overseer, and just finished an 8-year tenure at the North Cleveland Church of God. Also joining us as a co-host, Pastor Loran Livingston, 48 years in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Central Church of God, and the impact that you have made is generational, and it is such a delight to have both of you gentlemen joining me. And then our special guest today, Dr. David Cooper, Mount Paran Church of God in Atlanta, Georgia. And Dr. Cooper, first of all, let me say thank you for taking your time to be on here with us. We're going to start by talking about following a legacy leader. I think there's probably no greater example of a successful transition of leadership than that of Dr. Paul Walker and your transition as the pastor of that church. And so let me say welcome. We can start by just letting you share what's on your heart, and then we'll dive into talking about how all of that happened. How did you get to the church? How did you make your way to Mount Paran and kind of the history? And then how did God open the door for you to become the pastor of that church when Dr. Walker left?
Well, it's great to be with all of you guys. I like the subject. I don't know anything about legacy. I'm trying to figure out who is the legacy pastor here, so I'm interested in learning about that. And I appreciate you putting this podcast together for ministers to dialogue. Sometimes we get lectured to, sometimes just hearing people's stories, we connect with them. So it's an honor to be with you guys, and especially with Loran celebrating the incredible ministry he has had in Charlotte and continues to have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Dr. Walker was at Mount Paran how many years?
A lot. 37, if you want to count.
And I would think that all of us here were impacted by his ministry.
Absolutely.
No question.
He's the greatest pastor in the history of the Church of God, the most significant and the highest achiever.
You started attending church there as a teenager.
16, yeah. I grew up Presbyterian in East Point. My family was Presbyterian, and we made a change the month I turned 16. Big change. I didn't like it, but you know, my parents, they tell us we had 5 kids. They tell us where we're going to church. So I didn't get a say in it, but it was difficult for me at first.
David, one of the things about the Mount Paran Church, especially when you started going there, was the charismatic renewal. You know, a lot of denominations during that time, in Pentecost, were sort of standing back from the charismatic renewal. But Dr. Walker was one that really embraced the charismatic renewal. Were you there in those years?
Well, kind of. I mean, I didn't know anything about those terms. Coming from the Presbyterian Church, and then we made a change to the Christian Mission Alliance in East Point, which I now know came out of Presbyterianism. I didn't know that at the time, which is probably why my dad was willing to do it. And I was in the youth group, and I loved our church. And next thing I know, that we show up in Mount Paran. My sister got married to a guy that was in Mount Paran. That may have been how I don't know. Next thing I know, we just left our church. And I'm sitting there, and I know the church at the time, I didn't know that, but they had about 700 members, and they were building a small balcony in the back when we first came. So it was in the beginning, really, I guess, of the growth. I've learned history now, but it's when I showed up, and it was difficult at first. And Paul Dane and I became friends that summer, and that's kind of what put me right in the center and became my church, and it's been my church ever since. We joined next thing I know, we're for Sunday morning, and at the end of the service, our family sitting down there, and Dr. Walker's reading the name. We were members.
Now, David, did you leave for a season and go back in ministry when you went into ministry, or have you been?
No, I've
there
never been in ministry at Mount
from
Paran.
that day?
That was just my church, and Paul and we went to Lee together. He was coming here, and he played basketball, and we were just best friends. We roomed together. We took every class together, and we married girls who were best friends. And of course, he'd lost his life early. But I went to California to preach a year as an evangelist. Dr. Walker, it was hard to get started in ministry. And I was at their house one day, and it was toward the fall. I got 2 or 3 places to preach that summer. And sometimes Paul and we started preaching our 3rd year. And we'd go off occasionally if we could get a gig. He'd usually get it because he had his dad's name. And then he would take me and we'd split the services, kind of how we got started. And Dr. Walker, I was at the house and he asked me how things are going. I said, not too good. And so I went and had his little office and I went in and talked to him for a minute, and he pulled out a sheet of paper and said, well, these are the states I worked. His dad was an overseer, and I had met Paul's granddad a couple of times, heard him preach once at Mount Paran early when we first started coming. And he wrote North Dakota, South Dakota, Florida, and then he wrote California, and I said, I want to go there. I'd never been anywhere. I'd never been out of the States. I only flown on a plane once to Miami, and that's when Paul got us a preaching gig down there for a week. And so I went to California not knowing anybody. Brother Giles was the overseer, and I knew Rhonda and Renee from Lee. And a one-way ticket, never been anywhere. Got off at LAX, didn't know who was going to pick me up. I was the evangelism director and another minister. I guess they figured this guy looks lost. Take all my books in my suitcases, and no itinerary, no plan, and just the greatest year I've ever lived. I preached all over Southern California at the time, and those people made a great investment in me.
I like and I'm sure all of us have that story of that person who was instrumental in getting us started. I think even for you to go back to Charlotte was with the connection of your father-in-law. Was that not how you even found out about the church there?
I spoke at Lee with 1 semester left, and Dr. Charles Kahn asked me to speak to the staff and faculty. I was just married. I did. Afterwards, a gentleman came up and shook my hand and said, my name is Bill Brown. I'm the overseer of Southern Ohio. I know your daughter, or your wife, and I know her parents. I'm inviting you to come to Southern Ohio and be an evangelist. I'll have an itinerary for you, and you will have a place to preach as long as you want to be there. We prayed about it and left with 1 semester to go and spent the next almost 5 years doing just that, all over Southern Ohio and the Midwest. And that was God's way of preparing me. I didn't know how to preach. I only had 10 sermons, but I used them a lot. But he used Bill Brown to get me there. And then when my father-in-law, who used to pastor in Charlotte at the old Parkwood Church of God, we went home for Christmas, and he said, there's a small group of people that want to start a church in Charlotte. He was at the Home for Children at that time in Kannapolis. He said, I've been preaching to them on the weekends. They're meeting at East Coast Bible College in the library. You want to preach for them this weekend? I said, shoot, yeah, why not? And so I did. And they came up and said, would you be our pastor? And I said, no. I'm going back to Ohio. Will you preach for us tonight? Yes. Preach for them that night. The whole church said, what will it take? Now, when I say whole church, 19 people. They all said, please be our pastor. And I said, nope. So that was in December. In May, we moved to Charlotte. And I'm really making it brief, but we moved to Charlotte and started with 19 people. But God had Bill Brown there. And then, of course, my father-in-law had the connection with these people. And that was 1977.
Wow. And Mark, the thing that's with both of these stories, and I'm sure you've got yours, I've got mine, the pastor that helped us when we graduated from college and we're looking for our first job, Jesse Wiggins, who opened the door for a church that was looking for a youth pastor in Lexington, Kentucky. Wayne Proctor was the pastor there. Our first church, Brother Wiggins, was instrumental in getting us our first church. It was in Alaska. So I quit using him after that. After that, I was like, okay, I don't need your help anymore. You've been enough help. I don't need any more help. But I'm sure that we all have that story of there's that person. But what strikes me with both of you guys is the small beginnings. You know, because the young pastor, young minister looks at both of you today and sees large church pastor, a well-known name in our church and really even in the kingdom. But to imagine that David Cooper started with a one-way ticket and a suitcase to California, and that Loran Livingston started with a new marriage, and you know what, we're going to go to Ohio and we're just going to preach the gospel with 10 messages in your notebook. Yep.
And then you come back, they couldn't even pay us at the new church. We ate because our parents fed us. And we had our first baby. We couldn't afford a baby. We had to make payments on our first baby. And they even gave me a raise or gave me a salary at one time on a Sunday night. They met, gave me a salary. 3 days later, they rescinded it and said, we can't afford it.
No money.
No money. So we went home and cried, but I knew God called me. Wow. And I said, he will make a way, and he did. And for 3 years, nobody came to church except those 19 people. 3 years. But I told the Lord, I believe you sent me here. I made a covenant with him. If you'll send the people, I'll feed the people. He tested me for 3 years. But after 3 years, the dam broke. So small beginnings, you can't inherit this kind of stuff. God has to grow you in your own ministry.
Yeah, and prepare you.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, and right after this, we're going to come back. I love where the conversation's going, and I think that for those who are out there that are in the early stages of ministry, there's that eagerness of where's my place, where's my place? And sometimes you just got to start where you're at and allow God to take you to the place where he wants to plant you. And then when you get planted, it's easy, especially in our culture, to pull up the roots and move when after 2 years you don't see any results, instead of sticking it out and knowing this is where God's planted me. So we'll be back right after this. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
You're listening to the Between Sundays podcast. Mark your calendars for the 2025 Smoky Mountain Gathering. Don't miss this unforgettable event filled with anointed music, great food and fellowship against the backdrop of the breathtaking Smoky Mountains in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Special guests include Mark Lowry and the Lowry Vocal Band, General Overseer Gary Lewis, Tim Hill and Danny Murray for Redback Hymnal Night, Endless Highway and Riley Harrison Clark, and more. For more information and to register, visit SmokyMountainGathering.com.
Well, hi, welcome back to Between Sundays. You know, we were just in conversation about some of our beginnings in ministry, and it's so fascinating. Loran, you were talking about those early days there in Charlotte and those 19 people that you had. We were just talking in the break that the 19 that were there were wonderful people, but they had come to the church with some pretty deep pain.
Sure. It was a church split, and they moved out and decided to start a new church. One of their members was, he did well in life, and he wanted to start a new church, and he was responsible with his construction company to build a new building. So they came out angry, and we came from Cincinnati to minister to them, but they really weren't interested in that. They didn't want to grow, and I'm being very blunt here. And it was tough to deal with that because I had visions. Yeah, I wanted 100 people instead of 19, and it didn't seem to flow.
My first vision was 50 at our first church, so you dream twice as big as I do.
I'm a big dreamer.
50 on Sunday morning, 30 on Sunday night. I thought if I could ever have that, I'd be happy.
I just wanted a salary.
I didn't have one of your heads.
ordered to buy groceries.
What were your facilities like? I mean, how did that happen?
Well, before we got the new building up, we met in a Seventh-day Adventist church for about 3 months. So they finally got up our metal building, and we went into it with the 19 people. And although it was a nice little building, nobody came to church. Now, I will tell you that building was constructed on an X-rated drive-in theater site. That guy, that real estate construction guy in my church, bought 7 acres, and it was an X-rated drive-in theater. When I got there,
Making news right now.
yeah, they were bulldozing the speakers, the screen, and getting rid of the videos and putting a foundation for our church. When I got there, I saw that.
Wow.
So
I'm pretty confident that that's a piece of history that most folks don't know about the Central Church of God, that it was first built on the site of an X-ray drive-in
called the Big A Drive-In Theater.
What's weird is the Central Church in Hilton Head, where my good friend Michael Carter, that was a former strip club. The actual building is a church now. So
that's exactly right. Michael Carter.
The name Central Church goes with some shady.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too far with
And
that.
I've got Mount Perry Central, but that's not true of our church. Of course, we're not central anymore. So,
And David, let me just say, and again, I want to emphasize, because I don't want it to be missed. Both of you guys started with almost nothing. I mean, but faith, calling, and commitment to that call, to say that your hope was for 100 people. I am confident that that resonates with many who are listening today, who are just hoping, Lord, help us break 100. David, 50. Help us to break 50 and 30 on Sunday night. But to see that the faithfulness of God through the faithfulness of those that he calls.
Well, I will say this. It was a hopeless situation in my mind. My father-in-law and I spent many Friday nights all night long in prayer. I mean, all night. We walked the floors of that church and prayed, asked God to send people. We had all-night prayer meetings. We had week-long prayer meetings. We prayed. And we prayed. Sometimes it seemed like nothing would ever happen. But God was watching us believe him. And I knew he sent me there. So what do? You go. It doesn't matter who comes. What matters is that he sent you. We got a lot of guys not sent, they just went. And I would say to any of the young pastors today, quit thinking about having a mega church. Quit thinking about being number one. Think about faithfulness to God. That's what will count on Judgment Day. Not how many came to church, but were you faithful to feed whoever comes to church?
Yeah, good word, good word. David, you had mentioned you're California.
right.
A year?
Well, I had no plan. I still don't have a plan, which it was great for me. I did come back. Well, Paul Dane and I were close friends, so he had a youth pastor job in Augusta. So we talk on the phone occasionally. He said he met Julie and wanted me to come back to Atlanta immediately, thought I was going to get married. So I flew back. I never had any money. So I flew back, used up just about everything I had. And so I spent 2 weeks in Atlanta and spent most of the time over at their house. He took time off from Augusta. And so, in fact, Julie picked me up from the airport and he said, I want you to check her out for me. And then I was there for a few days and I had a date set up for Friday night, but she wanted me to eat Barbie. They worked together at Coca-Cola and I didn't want to do that. And she showed me a picture of her but Paul said, come on, man, we got to hang out. So I was, okay, so that was a blind date, the only one ever. I fell in love with her. And so I had a revival starting on a Wednesday night at Bellflower Church of God for everybody's brother back then.
That's right.
It's Hank and Jimmy
Yes, they
Davis.
were, Brother David.
Hank
Yes,
Davis
they
and I
were.
became really good friends. And Hank and Rhonda, that's where I met him. It was his dad. And so I had to fly back that morning. So I asked her to marry me Tuesday night at some I think the Golden Corral there in Atlanta. No ring. I didn't even plan to ask her. It's a great moment. So eventually I kind of wrapped the revivals up and came back and became a youth pastor in Bremen for Brother Garvin and Mary Sellers, who had given Paul and me our first opportunity to preach in that little church, and they became like parents to me. He just passed. And became the youth pastor, and then after almost 2 years, I just felt it was time to go, and I walked in our duplex and said, I feel like we need to leave. She said, where are we going? I said, I don't know. Knowing where you're not supposed to be is important in life. Like God told Abram, leave. I'll show you later, but you've got to leave. Until you leave where you are, you can't see where you're going. So I moved in with my older brother who had his own business and tried to do revivals again. And Jim Bolin gave me a revival. What a great man. And there was a small church in Athens that had tried to get started out of the East Athens Church of God. I didn't know anything about it. They'd been meeting for about a year. Same kind of thing. And the associate pastor at the Church in Crisis, they started the small thing. They bought 1 acre of land, a little metal building. They started this church there. Had about 40 people. The whole thing's falling apart. They came to Mount Perrin for help. And Dr. McClune, the associate pastor, takes me out there with him one time. And next thing you know, they invited me to come and speak. I did that. I was just interested. I think you said that. I go preach anywhere. I'll go preach anywhere today. And they were in a pastoral church. I didn't think I was a pastor. I was an evangelist, It's really interesting. I came up on a Wednesday night, spoke to, I had 5 people there. And the Lord spoke to me to be the pastor. And so I met with the 3 men we had that were basically paying the bills. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. The bank was about to foreclose in a few months. And I said, I'm going to be your pastor. They said, fine with us. It's going down the tubes anyway. And so that was it. Nobody voted for me. That was it. And started with my first organization. I had 12 members. Metal building. I mean metal walls. I don't mean even insulation on the walls. And Dan was a photographer. Had this massive banner, white banner, said, share the vision in red letters. I put on the back of that. Huge, from end to end of the building. So when you sat there and listened to me preach, you're seeing something. I still have the newspaper. I went to the newspaper in Athens. They had a Saturday church section. I still have the article. Muriel Anderson was the editor. Had her interview me. Gave her a picture of me and Barbie. New church, share the vision. Half a page, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, like vision. Like, they didn't even know what was coming out, 12 people. And I still lived with my brother Bill for the first 3 months, and we drove up. And we had new visitors every Sunday. May, we broke 105. Sorry, we beat you to that one. I too made gas. They paid me enough for gas. I mean, we were on the verge of bankruptcy. The first offering I took, I knew nothing about anything. So I would come to Mount Perrin and make them a bulletin because they didn't have it. So I was always into excellence. I'd come down there, Mount Perrin, and print it. And I still have the article. I didn't know balloon notes. I don't know. So I put them there, we got this much for the property. It was interest only, 3 balloon notes for interest, the piano, the air conditioning. It was $6,600 and something. It was almost like 666. I still have it. It was to raise interest. I'm making I think $75 a week for gas. And I have no idea where that money came. I have no idea where that money came from. I saw the miracle provision of God. And to this day, it's interesting. I went back. We're finishing our youth center. We had this beam raising ceremony yesterday in Athens. And when I finish it, since I became the pastor, we will have built on the campus $75 million paid for. I cannot, if people come and say, how do you do that? I have no idea. And I love Loran's story. These are stories of faith. And he said faithfulness. I think it's about obedience. If God speaks to you to go somewhere, in my mind, my parents were like, you obey your parents. That's woven into my DNA. And it doesn't matter if you're there 3 years or 30 years. It doesn't matter the people. It matters that you're doing the will of God and believe what you're doing. And that's for the joy. And I would take issue with, and I tell pastors this, they say, I got a small church. I say, stop saying that. And I wish our denomination would stop saying it. Because it's, in my opinion, it's demeaning to the minister. My church is not large, and Loran's it. There's 7 billion people in the world. You got to put the church in context of the field. Jesus said, look at the field. Quit looking at your pew, look at the field.
Wow. That's good.
Churches are either significant or insignificant. So I didn't start small, and Loran didn't. What we had was significant.
Yeah,
California was
powerful.
significant.
Yeah.
The 19 people, the 12 people, that enough just barely make groceries, It's significant. It's not small. And people are frustrated in ministry, in my view, because what they're doing isn't significant. And they feel it. They don't feel they're making a difference. Preaching to the 12 is the same as preaching. I have 12,000 members. They're all over the place. And Loran's you can't even find these people. And people say, what's it like to preach to 2,000, 3,000 people, whatever? It's no different than the 12. It feels, I think he'll tell you something. The joy is in the sermon preparation, the prayer, knowing you've got something meaningful, and pouring your heart out. The people in front, for me, I could preach to that camera today with the same passion. It's what's in a man. It's not what's around a man or a woman that gives significance in meeting. And I was your story. I think this sounds like the track I've been running on. But everything he's talking about had meaning.
Yeah.
And that to me is, people get burned out of ministry because what they're doing doesn't matter.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Absolutely.
One woman called the church yesterday from Las Vegas who heard the sermon I preached on why you can believe the Bible. And as people left, I had written a whole paper. They could also further reading. They took it. She calls from Vegas and asked my assistant, can I get a copy? Now, the thing is online. You could download. She said, I don't want a PDF. I want the paper. And so she tells me this today. That one person in Vegas is so important to me. And if ministers would see, make your church significant. Make your sermon significant. And I think it's all the God factor. You got to do the little bit. You go with your 5 loaves and 2 fish. And it's absurd. He says, go find what you... They come back with 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's absurd. But he said, that's enough. Mm-hmm. That is enough. But until you find the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and you got to go look for a long time to find it. Until you do that, there's no multiplication. But the multiplication is God. You cannot ask a pastor why this church is big. You can't. God controls the multiplication. The pastor just goes and gets the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and then watch what God does with it and give God the glory.
Yeah, and that's what a powerful, powerful insight on significance. And I think for a lot of pastors, so many factors determine numbers, and yet for the church, numbers are almost everything we gauge success by. But you could be in a small town, and I'm thinking of some of the churches in South Georgia when I was overseer there. They're the largest church in the town. I think of a church in Baxley, Georgia that probably runs 400 or 500. But in Baxley, Georgia, a town of just 3,000 or 4,000
Y'all make metal
people.
buildings down there. We built our first little building add-on. It got the steel structure from Baxley, Georgia.
But the impact that they're making on that
is.
town. And then there's another little church just outside Baxley that the lady that pastors there, she was at Lee University. Her grandfather had pastored the church for 30-something years, died suddenly. Her and her husband went and took the church. She was probably at the time 22, 23. Literally, the population of the little area where she lives is, if you're lucky, 200 people. She's outside the town of a few thousand people. But God has just sent revival to that little church, and with her vision and passion, and they probably run 100 plus. That's significant. They're making a significant impact on that area where they're at. And I think, like you said, David, if we could transform the way we think about success and quit looking at the measurements of success in how many are sitting in front of us or how many, and look at the measure of success through significance and what impact am I making on the person that's hearing these 12 people. This is what I've got. Right. So I'm going to be significant with these 12 people.
2 things. There's really only one church builder.
Yeah.
I will build my church.
Amen. That's right.
So what is my call? Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. He didn't say build a church. Yeah. He'll build the church. We are to feed the sheep.
Right. And today, they say in America, ask people, why you go to church? The number one thing they're looking for is a good sermon. It's still number one on the list of people's desire in a church. It's the Word of God. This is what they're looking for.
Well, I think it's time. got to take another break here. I definitely want to come back and bump that one more time. And David, we've gotten way off topic on following Dr. Walker, but it's been a great conversation.
I started
Mark.
preaching. I apologize, but just what you get with us, right?
No,
Bunch of
well, that's what we
preachers on the
want.
set.
And, you know, Mark, I think, again, the thing that just keeps jumping out over and over again is the one that's called and the one that calls, and that relationship and understanding that relationship is very important on a impactful ministry. That we've got to understand what our role is, and that is to be obedient and faithful to the call, to prepare, to feed, to care for. But the caller is the one who takes the loaves and we bring the loaves and fish. I love that analogy. He multiplies the loaves and fish. He is the one that builds the church. Our call is to feed the sheep. And I think that for pastors that are listening, what a great, if they could grasp that concept, what a great load's taken off their shoulders. It's not your church. It's his church.
It really is a life-changing thought when you suddenly realize that this is Jesus' church and he's the one to build the church. I'm called to feed the church. I love the things that are coming up here. I mean, one of the things that's coming up here, Gary, is that really there are no, small churches are not failed large churches. Michael Nations is fond of saying that. The question shouldn't even be small or large. The question should be, am I being obedient? Am I being faithful to what the Lord has called me? Something else that's been very significant to me here so far, the people that you still carry in your heart from the beginnings of your ministry that helped open the door. We heard this. There was no rehearsal here. We heard this names after name after name of persons that the Lord used to open the door. You both were evangelists. In those days of, I would imagine, it was like when I started as an evangelist, you would stay in people's homes.
Yes.
You would go into churches and cities, and it was toward the end of my evangelism that people started putting me in hotels, but you stayed in people's homes.
And they weren't very good.
Yes.
Motels, there's a difference.
Oh,
I've been there.
I got stories
in the Mojave
there, I bet
Desert,
you
in the
do.
motel, I've been
We
there.
were newlyweds.
Yeah.
And we're in a parsonage, a 2-bedroom parsonage. The pastor and his wife are right beside us. If I sit on the bed and it squeaks, my wife says, shh. We're newlyweds. Boy, I got stories, but that's not ministry stories. That's just no, those are
marriage stories. But that's what you did in those days.
Yeah, and you know what?
But it's so enjoyable. I mean, I would
Yes.
go back to it in a heartbeat.
There
This is
were
amazing.
conversations that took place around a table until late at night and early in the morning, talking about the church, laughing, crying, talking about the birds. Sometimes you found as an evangelist that you were taking away much more than what you were there to give. And then other times the Lord would use these moments for a pastor to be able to share their heart. In a safe place.
I have very intimate friends that I developed in ministry up there. I'll say this, some pastors taught me how to pastor. Other pastors taught me how not to pastor.
Right, that's
I didn't know how to say
But
that.
that's good.
Yeah.
There
You
were
just
things.
did.
That's very good.
There were things I learned from pastors in those experiences of what I wanted to do, and there were things that I learned that I do not want to do.
Right.
But you still carry those people
Yes.
in your heart, and I know pastors in the early days, or earlier in my ministry anyway, that it's almost like they felt their call was to get young preachers
I
started
think it was.
into ministry.
I've been, as a young pastor, or young evangelist, I put it that way, I've been rebuked by pastors in front of lots of people. We had people give money to the church so we could have money and have the pastor keep that money. You saw a lot of questionable things.
Yes.
And I wondered, how can men of God do these things? But then you see others who were so conscientious about their walk, their work, their people. They prayed, they really cared about the people.
And those are the ones that formed something in me about
that's good.
shepherding.
And you can't let the imperfections of people spoil your joy or the integrity of the ministry or make you cynical. That's just a part of a human failure. It can't cloud when guys see things and think, well, that's not appropriate. It can't get you off your mission and the call of Christ and the perfection of Jesus.
Yeah, and you can't allow exactly. You can't allow the actions of others to determine your path. And we've got a break, but we all have hurt stories, and we all have stories of disappointment, and we all have, when you mentioned about the someone giving in the offering, and the pastor I've had that happen to me, where they came to me after church and said, "Hey, I put in money because I wanted to bless you."
Yes.
And it was money you never saw, and so, but you can't hold that bitterness because it's the human nature, and you can't hold that bitterness.
And
it's
it's part of the ministry.
It's part of the ministry. So,
And everything that happens to us teaches us. It depends on how we receive it.
Yes.
Everything is a teacher.
absolutely.
And God allows really bad things to happen because I need to learn something.
Absolutely.
So we try to pray our way out of situations. God says, no, I put that situation there because I'm trying to work something in you.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. He uses it all. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and there have been some questions that have been sent in. We're going to go through those questions. Mark, you lead us through some of those questions when we come back after this break. Dr. Cooper, listen, we can't let you go yet. You're going to have to stick around. We're going to keep this conversation going. There's some more things that I think that we want to talk about, and it's been a great conversation. Really appreciate you taking time to be with us, and I just want to say, you mentioned you'll preach anywhere. When I was in South Georgia, any pastor in that state that called you and asked you to come, regardless of the size of his church, you were always there to you made it work, and so your heart for the church and the impact that you've made that everyone sitting here has made is phenomenal. And honored that you would join us. So stick around. We're going to be back in a moment, and we're going to answer some questions, and appreciate you joining us today.
Join us for We Gather. 4 gatherings, 4 cities for lead pastors. Don't miss this special time of fellowship, encouragement, and inspiration. Lead pastors and spouses from across the region are invited to connect, enjoy a Major League Baseball game, share a meal, and be refreshed by powerful messages the next day. Coming to Dallas, Texas, April 4th and 5th. Baltimore, Maryland, May 2nd and 3rd. Atlanta, Georgia, September 5th and 6th. Cincinnati, Ohio, September 19th and 20th. Register today at wegathercog.com.
Well, welcome back to Between Sundays. One of the things I love about our conversations is when we come to the end of a segment, we want to take time for questions. You'll have an opportunity to send in questions that we can take on the spot and ask some of our guests, or even ask our General Overseer, Gary Lewis. Here today, one of the main questions that keeps coming in has to do with transition. You followed a legacy pastor. You followed Paul Walker, 37 years. You've talked about that. You had the personal relationship, right. But now the Lord is leading you to actually step in to be the pastor. Talk about that transition. Talk about what it's like to honor your predecessor and yet earn the trust to be able to lead in a new direction.
That could take a long time. Transitions are interesting, and ministers go through them all the time. Transitions are all different, and I think they're based on relationships and competency. So the Mount Perrin story for me is I'm coming back from Living Faith. We were there right at 10 years when he called me, and we had a conversation. And we'd grown from 12 members to over 1,600. So I moved through all these stages, these 100, 200. I was moving through these, what they call barriers at warp speed. And so I pastored 12 people and now 12,000, and everything in between. So all that's transition too. But my relationship to him and Carmelita and their family, of course, Mark, and being a member of the church welcomed. I came as associate pastor of Central at the time. We had North and a couple of these other outreaches, but I was basically the pastor of Mount Perrin Central. So I hired everybody. I had the elders meetings. I've set the budget. So I was actually the pastor, even the title was associate pastor. I actually pastored that church.
Okay.
I made all the decisions.
Okay.
And he was kind of over the whole thing. So that's a little different. And then I have this history. So I was their pastor for 5.5 years. The first year I preached 50% of Sundays, and then I started a Wednesday night service that he wanted something different, like a Bible study. And then by the second year, I'm preaching 60 to 70% of Sunday mornings at our church. So by the time his transition happened, when he became the general overseer, which we had no plan. We had no plan when I came to Mount Perrin. There's no plan. There's no plan. He asked me he said, I have this in mind, and God had already been speaking to me. I have a journal 2.5 years earlier, written 5 pages, where God spoke to me about going to Mount Perrin. I pastored Living Faith, growing, and I knew this was coming some point, which is a very frustrating thing to be doing what you're called to do, and God says this is coming to an end. And so we just had lunch together, and he told me what was on his mind, and I told him what the Lord had put on my heart. I had no job description or compensation salary and I went back and resigned, which was that's tough. I've learned now that can be very painful for people. I'm still close to so many of them, and pastors. I didn't think about that then. I moved way too fast. I'm very impulsive, and I think you can make collateral damage. You can make great progress.
It's an important point.
I look back at that now.
Yeah.
And so when he got elected general overseer, none of us knew that was coming. We're all sitting there thinking, okay, now what? And so, we just made it up. He stayed another year working on final transitions, really trying to get North and Central separate because they were still kind of dependent on us. And so for the church, and I was installed by Dr. Walker, general overseer, by Dr. Delbert Rose, state overseer, with a congregational vote. And so it was just, we didn't even have a transition really. And I went right into that to the Let Us Rise Up and Build program. And so it's just been another chapter in the Mount Perrin story. Our church is 105 years old now, started in a tent revival downtown Atlanta. So I'm just another chapter in the story. But the great majority of Mount Perrin is Dr. Walker and me, the huge part of the whole story.
The relationship became very important.
It's everything, because at times he would get emotional, and because I'm sitting up there on the stage at the time, and all he can think about is me and Paul Dana being college age, and then Paul lost his life so he's got these memories, and I've got them. It was very painful at times. He'd start relapsing into some story about me and Paul doing something stupid, and I could tell became very painful for him, because I'm a visible reminder, But I think a transition is based on the relationship you have, and then your competency. If you follow a minister who has a doctoral degree and you don't have one in front of your name like I do and earned one, those people will notice the difference. If this person can preach at this level and hold the attention of 2,000 people, that's hard to hold the attention of
Did you find yourself
people.
being compared to Dr. Walker in preaching?
Well, it's a natural comparison. Everybody's always made it. I mean, there's no doubt that.
But you were secure in yourself. That didn't bother you.
They didn't compare me like that. They said you're like him. A newer version of him. Anybody that knows our ministry, you can see the continuity. That's the kind of thing that comes from God, So I think ministers, I still tell stories about him, and stories he told, because I always had him come back and preach, because I want our people to know the Mount Perrin story. This is not my church, and it's, as Loran said, this is a story that God started 105 years ago in a tent revival. So when you go to a church, it's a sacred trust. When I first became the senior pastor, there was a pastor, and Dr. Frank Harrington, pastor, the first president of downtown Atlanta, had died. And they were friends. I'd met him once with Dr. Walker. And Vic Pence came and became the pastor, and we got to know each other. And the Atlanta Journal did a huge article on me and him about pastoring transitions in a mega church. and I still have the article. They were asking us these very type things, you know. He was interested. He grew up Pentecostal holiness. I grew up Presbyterian, and now I'm pastoring a Pentecostal church. It was like really interesting stories. And he just retired from there. So I think the transitions are about your relationship with the people and your competency. If you follow somebody at a certain competency level, talent level, if you don't match it, you're in trouble. So the years of my relationship with him, he came and preached in Athens a few times. He saw the growth of the church. I've lived through the 100, the 200, like Loran has. These are living experiences for me. I know what it's like to cross the 500 barrier and all this kind of stuff by experience. And so without that experience, I could not pastor Mount Paran. Until you can't manage millions of dollars unless you get used to those numbers. You can't manage growth unless you've lived through it. Understand, church growth, getting people is easy. Keeping people is what's hard. You have to learn that the hard way as a pastor. So the guys that think you're stepping from one box to another, that life is not like that. And the last thing I would say about transitions is, and I've been asked this by pastors, I have no out plan. I have no transition plan. I don't even think that's important. Everybody I see doing that, it fails. So I'm not a big believer in transition plans or succession plans. I can tell you story after story. I'm sure Loran can. They had it all worked out. Yeah. Well, you can use some planning, but you better leave room for God in a transition. So I would say this about pastors going to church, and I was asked this by a pastor in South Carolina a few years ago, talking to ministers, and he and his wife had just been appointed to a Church of God, traditional church he called it, and he said, we're new to the church, we want to do this, and we got the old guard, they're still singing out of the red back hymnal, which I understand has an anniversary coming up, right?
Big anniversary.
And they're talking to me there, and he said, I said, well, congratulations. He said, listen, they're stuck in the old ways, and we want to change, and we want some new songs. He said, how can we change the church? He said, what should we do? I said, until you learn to sing their songs with joy and enthusiasm, they'll never respect yours.
Wow.
And I said, God sent you to that church to respect what He's doing there. Until you become part of that church and love those people and can embrace who they are, you're not going to be able to go anywhere. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about this in his book, Life Together. He calls them dream weavers.
Yes.
People go into a church and they think, man, this is a great church. And the lay people do it too. They say, Pastor, we should be doing this. And I got a vision for that. And the minister comes in and say, well, we're going to change the carpet. We're going to change the music. We're going somewhere. And he calls them dream weavers. They come with a vision. And he said, you go to church, you've got to see what is there and see what God has been doing and is doing and respect what God's doing there and not bring your vision, your dream. So if a guy gets appointed to church, he needs to get in there and love the people. Barb and I have always said this. We've preached all kind of places. I could pastor any church in America and be happy because I do what I do because I care about people. As long as they don't tell me what to preach, and nobody in my entire ministry has ever weighed in on any sermon I've ever preached. And I can just preach the Word of God. We can have communion every Sunday. It doesn't really matter to me. It's whether or not you can go somewhere and embrace those people, love the people. Loran talked about it, the 19 people. He loved them for what they were.
That's right.
And over time, he's in that community. You have to love people and respect. This is a valuable church. And our ministers are doing it. I'm going off preaching. They think they go into the denomination to change the church of God. If you can't be an ordained minister and respect what this church is, with all of our faults and everything, we're human. If you can't value the church of God for what it is, you shouldn't be pastoring in this denomination. God doesn't raise us up to change the church of God. We have to value it, respect it, and let God grow us and lead us together in unity. So that's my take on transitions. Your relationship with the people and your competency is going to determine how the transition works out.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And let me just, two things I want to mention, and I know we're going to run out of time here pretty quick, but in regards to changing the church, Loran, you said earlier when you went to those 19 people, they didn't want to grow. They didn't want to grow the church. So you had to stay at it. You had to stay with it, and you had to. And I think that's becoming part of you. You become a part of the church, and And I think that's a great point, David. I think too often we go through the doors of, I'm going to change this, and this. And, and then to broaden that to our church, to the Church of God, there's things all of us would change.
Yeah.
There's things that all of us would say, hey, we need to do that different, we need to. But I love what you said. We're a chapter. We're a chapter.
Yes.
We're just a chapter in the history, in the
great
story of
Amazing
what
story.
God is still writing and going to continue to write. One of the things that the Lord just really impressed on my heart at General Assembly, when we're talking about the vision for the church, is it's nothing new. This church was here before you to be here after you.
Yes.
In fact, the church itself was birthed with the example of Christ and the day of Pentecost. And you know what? The call of the church has never changed. To reach the harvest, to disciple believers, to care for the lost and the needy, to pray. Those fundamental truths are woven throughout the history of our church. I saw in our earliest meetings, in our very first General Assembly, the call for prayer that led to a call to evangelism. And so we're just a chapter. We're just a page in the history. And I think if guys see it as this is bigger than me, if ministers see it as this is much bigger than this is God's, and I'm just a chapter. And when we were break, Loran, you had mentioned when we were talking about the question on transition, you had a great thought on that. I wanted to come back around and let you share it.
Well, I'm often asked, do you have an exit strategy? I didn't have an entrance strategy. I've never had a strategy. I just lived one day at a time, doing what I'm supposed to do. We make this way more complicated than it is. I hope this is taken the right way. We read way too many books by far too many who don't understand who we are or what we're called to do, even in our denomination. And I know we belong to the Church of the Living God, but we have a culture. And I think we get jealous and we want to be up there with them. Even denominationally, we've thought that way before. So we try to bring in people to show us how to do it. God raised this church up because God had a purpose and a plan for the church of God. That's true individually in local churches. If we'll just do what we're supposed to do. I'm supposed to take care of people.
Yes.
That means I bury them, I marry them, I baptize them, and I can't do it like I used to. There's far too many and I'm far too tired. But, I put as much preparation, this is the truth, into a small funeral as I do a Sunday morning service.
Yes.
You know why? People. They're crying. They're hurting. They're lonely. That's ministry. And I think when we begin to see a large group of people waiting to hear us speak, we may think too much of ourselves sometimes. I want to say this. I don't know if you agree or not. The scariest moment of my life is when I walk to the pulpit.
Yes.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Terrified.
Yes, me too.
My hands, my clothes are wet.
Absolutely.
I'm nauseous. My knees are knocking. And I've had people say, but you've been doing this 55 years. So? I'm doing this one today.
Yes.
This is like the first one I've ever done, and it may be the last one I'll ever do before I stand before Him. So, we may walk up there with a smile, and we've gathered some information over the years. We can spit it out. We can do poems, we can tell jokes, we can do all that. And we can entertain people. But God didn't call us to entertain people.
Amen.
And so I read this as a young preacher one time. A young man was preaching his second or third sermon. He thought he had it all together. He went up and he blew it. And he came down, crestfallen, and he said to an older minister, I don't know what happened. The older minister said, I do. He said, if you had gone up the way you came down, you could have come down the way you went up.
Wow.
And that's humility, that's preparation, that's knowing what ministry is. Preaching is the most mysterious thing on this earth.
the most powerful thing. It's the thing he ordained. And if you remember, when Paul was telling Timothy about who he was, he said, I am a preacher. Then he said, I am an apostle. Yeah. Then he said, I'm a teacher. He put preacher right up there in front of everything else. Yeah. Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Jesus was a preacher.
That's right.
Preach. I get to preach. I get picked out. He laid his hand on me.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
And this is not me. This is him speaking through me. And I think if ministers would either capture or recapture the profoundness, the great honor of being a preacher, something would happen in our church.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Growth and warmth and ministry and discipleship. Oh boy, I could go on and on.
I was hoping you were going to help me get over my anxiety.
No, I can't help
And I
you,
called
buddy. I'm
Dr.
in
Williams.
trouble.
I called Mark. He's going out of town. We were at this meeting. And I said, he's going to South Carolina. I said, what are you going to preach on? He said, I don't really know right now. He said, I'm kind of not really sure. And I thought, man, I'm the same way. I said, am I the only one? Hundreds of sermons are written. You can't make up your mind every week. So it is a mystery and an honor and a privilege.
A labor.
We're going to be judged differently and separately.
That's right.
When I realized the Lord called me to preach, I didn't know. I don't know how much time we have here, but
No, we're good. We're good.
I was in the second grade, second row, second seat. My teacher was Miss Cashin. She was teaching us how to write. Something came over me. I didn't know what it was. It lasted 10 seconds. I forgot about it. I spent the next years in sin. I came to Lee University. I went down to the basement of old Walker Hall to the furnace room. I fell across a wooden bench. I wept and said, here I am. That same second grade experience came on me then. And I knew it was God.
Wow.
And, he called us before the foundation of the world.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right.
Yep.
Why? Because he wanted to. Nothing special.
Divine prerogative.
Yeah. And so I don't ever want to forget the honor of having the Almighty trust me to feed the people he died for.
Wow. Wow. You know what? I think that's the thought we've got to close on. And, Pastor, why don't you just close us out in a quick prayer for those pastors that are watching, the ministers that are watching. It's such a humbling honor that God would choose me.
Yeah.
Who am I? And I think that sometimes we allow the grind and the stuff to cloud the sacred call that God placed upon everyone who stands up and declares His word. And I think maybe it'd just be good for them to be reminded, maybe to, in their minds, even to go back to that place, but to be reminded, God's called you. God's called you, and God doesn't make mistakes, and there's no accident.
Nope.
Pray for us, Pastor.
Father, I thank you for calling me, and I'm sitting with men who are thankful they are called. And I don't know how many are watching this podcast, but I pray that suddenly they will realize the high honor and the holy calling of being able to walk to a pulpit and preach to 6 or 600. It doesn't matter, Lord. That's not even the point.
Amen.
You died for the people in front of that pulpit. And I pray that these men and women will suddenly feel a surge of honor that you laid your hand on them.
Wow.
In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen. Amen. What a powerful time we've had today. David, stay with us. We want to keep going with this conversation. So when you join us next time, Pastor Cooper's still going to be with us. We want to continue this conversation. I still think that there's some more things that would be a blessing to those that are listening. Mark, this has just been a great session. The insight that has come from this podcast has been just incredibly a incredible blessing to me.
It's been such a blessing to me, and I'm so thankful to be a part. I love Loran, and I love David so much, and you, Gary, just to be a part of this conversation. And by the way, I want to encourage you to please share this podcast. with others. Maybe you just happened to stumble on it or something, and you want to, and the Lord spoke to you. Why don't you take a moment and just share that and invite others to be a part of this podcast?
Absolutely. And join us next time on Between Sundays, authentic, real conversations on life and ministry.
Between Sundays is a member of the Church of God Global Communications Podcast Network.